According to the CDC's webpage, facts and figures updated in 2012, 40,600 people died from suicide in 2012, making it the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. With it being the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, we are all statistically going to know someone or have known someone that has committed suicide or will commit suicide. By the end of today's presentation, I will prove the importance of having an open dialogue about suicide. Today I will cover the following: the impact of suicide, the misconceptions surrounding talking about suicide, and the stigma associated with suicide. According to Mitchell, Crane, and Kim in 2008, in an article, Perceived Stress in Survivors of Suicide, Psychometric Properties of the Perceived Stress Scale, almost every successful suicide will leave an estimated of 6 suicide survivors. A suicide survivor is someone that is left behind by a loved one or a good friend by suicide. These survivors are statistically more likely to commit suicide. It's hypothesized that this is due to the continuing cycle of guilt and an inability to cope with losing a loved one in such a way. According to the Center for Suicide Prevention in 2010, the financial cost of completed suicides was an estimated $16 billion and an estimated $4.7 billion for unsuccessful attempts. These statistics take into account direct and indirect effects the cost of suicide has. Direct expenses include funeral costs, police costs, and medical bills, just to name a few. Indirect expenses are comprised of things such as lost wages, productivity loss, as well as processing claims and payment out of those claims. Now we've discussed the impact of suicide, we'll talk about the misconceptions surrounding suicide. One of the common misconceptions that surrounds suicide is talking about suicide. By bringing it up, you will give them the idea that they're going to commit suicide. This is an excuse that many people use as to not approach it with someone because it's uncomfortable. In reality, by bringing up the topic of suicide with someone, by approaching the topic, you're more likely to let them know that somebody cares, and they're more likely to open up and realize that there are other channels available to them. It is also a common belief that if someone is going to commit suicide, there's nothing you can do to stop them. This is also untrue. Rather than someone who's set their mind to suicide, they're not set to kill themselves. They're more likely to be indifferent to life. They don't care if they live, they don't care if they die. Oftentimes this is because they don't think anyone cares about them or loves them. So by approaching this topic with them, by asking them if they're okay, it lets them know that people do care, that someone is there to listen, and may give them the strength to continue on. Now that we've addressed the misconceptions surrounding talking about suicide, we'll talk about the stigma associated with discussing suicidal thoughts. Many people who are suicidal don't seek out help because of the stigma associated with suicide and being suicidal. A study by Brownson, Becker, Shattuck, Jagger, and Nick Canner showed that many times college students will avoid seeking help for their suicidal ideations, and they hypothesized that this may be due to the different cultural and family ties that they have. They've shown that in certain cultures, they're even less likely to seek help. Many times, people feel shame for their mental illness and guilt for wanting to end their own lives, and they won't seek professional help for fear of the judgment and repercussions that their feelings may have on their relationships or job. Now that we've discussed the stigma associated with suicide, we'll review this presentation. Today we've discussed the impact of suicide, debunked the misconceptions that surround suicide, and talked about the stigma associated with suicide. I have proved the importance of having an open dialogue about suicide and positive outcomes that could have. By having an open dialogue about suicide, we can help to reduce the number of people that are affected each year.